I suppose it should come as no surprise that I get asked questions about the relationship between religion and martial arts. And so just to kind of, for starters, let me just make an observation. Martial arts are not religions. They're simply not. When you do martial arts, there's only two things you can do with a martial art. You can hurt somebody or you can practice hurting somebody. That's it. All of the ways in which we do martial arts and the feelings we have about our practice of martial arts, they boil down to this kind of real simple reality. I'm practicing hurting people. That's it. Sometimes I go further. Sometimes my technique, I'm practicing not just hurting, but harming. And sometimes when I do a technique, I'm not practicing just hurting and harming, but practicing injuring to some extreme degree and even killing. That's not exactly a religious vocation. But in the world in which we live, warriors are necessary, but warriors are not the same as fighters. Warriors operate from a moral code. The idea that strength is not a sufficient reason for anything, and that having strength doesn't mean you then have the right to do whatever you want. That strength means you're responsible for protecting the people who don't have strength. That's what it means, and that's what warriors are about. And where does that ethical thing come from? Well, often it comes from religions. For warriors to do what they have to do, they often need to turn to religious insight to enable themselves to function in the warrior environment. And so, even in the United States, where we have this really strict policy of separation of church and state, the military has chaplains, professional. These are not psychologists or counselors. This is not like Star Trek where you have a ship's counselor. Chaplains are religious leaders, and they're hired to perform. Not hired, they're part of the U.S. military, paid for by tax dollars, to perform religious functions for warriors, because warriors need religion. So when you look at the history of martial arts, almost all martial arts are somehow linked to a religious source. They just are. Silat's a great example. If you go into Indonesia and you see the practitioners of Silat, within their Silat training, there's often a great deal of material that's actually Islamic, lessons in Islamic technique, and many of their techniques they intone as they perform the technique one of the 72 names of God, which is found traditionally in Islam. And they believe that the intonation of that name brings a special kind of power. In other words, this is a form of what we call Kiai-Jitsu, the use of vocalization to move chi and energy. And this is a very powerful thing. Because Indonesia was also colonized by the Dutch, and the Dutch were Christians, then they developed a Christian version of Silat, which has very similar elements, where they incorporate religious components in there. You have many practices around the world that have religious components. Japanese martial arts often contain some kind of religious element. A Shinto shrine, sort of overlapping of some Shintoism. I was in a Chinese Kung Fu school once. I was young, and I'd never been in a Chinese school. I was used to the Japanese, and I'm standing there, and I walk in, I'm standing at attention. I just came to watch, and they're all training, and they're so casual. The teacher's walking around with a can of Coke in his hand, and I'm thinking, this is weird. So I thought, well, when in Rome, right? You should try to fit in. So I tried to, stop this whole kind of attention thing and just get relaxed. And there was a shelf thing kind of by the door where I was standing, and I kind of leaned on that. And the Sifu walks over, and he's with his can of Coke in his hand. He just kind of strolls over to me. He goes, "Would you do me a favor and not lean on our altar?" So religion is everywhere in the martial arts. But most of us don't practice martial arts as our religion. And so we don't actually, especially in the West, Western American, especially American practitioners, we don't see the religious component. Even when we talk about Zen Buddhism and meditation, we don't see it as a religious thing, it's mental training. And so that changes our relationship with these practices. And so for me in the dojo I grew up in, there's there's an American flag and a Japanese flag, and there's a picture of Gichin Funakoshi and Masatoshi Nakayama, and we used to bow, and we were just paying our respects. It didn't mean anything to us. But I did have a colleague in seminary who was when I was in graduate school, and he was a a Christian in Japan, a Japanese Christian, and he had come to the United States to do training because he was preparing, like me, he was preparing to be a pastor, and so he was doing some of his training in the United States, and he was, I think, a second dan in Aikido. And I was just sort of curious, and I asked him about it, and he told me that he himself would not bow. He would not bow at the dojo because to him that was not appropriate, because for him, as a Japanese man growing up in Japanese culture, the shomen, the front of the dojo in Japan, had too many religious overtones. To him to bow would be to be bowing to a false god. Here in Oman, sort of the same thing. The teacher in the dojo very insistent that everyone bows, that bowing is a simple sign of respect. But there's, among some of the Muslims here, a very, very strict kind of subgroup who won't do that. They say, well, you don't bow the head to anyone but God, because that's idolatry. And so they would refuse to just engage in this sort of natural, normal karate practice of bowing as a sign of mutual respect to one another, because to them it carried a religious overtone. But martial arts isn't religion. It just isn't. We may bring our religious sensibilities into the dojo or the kun or whatever training environment we're in. Our teacher might have very strong religious convictions and may bring those into that environment, which is why you often find Christian dojos in the United States where there's a lot of emphasis on Christianity, and there's a lot of talk about Christian faith and Christian belief, and sometimes even to advance in rank you have to memorize certain passages of Christian scripture along with your kata and along with this and that, and learn principles of Christian living. That's something we do. The art itself is not religious, and it's not religion, but we are religious. Even people who say they're not religious are religious somehow. They really are. We're all looking for some greater spiritual reality to be a part of, and we bring it with us. So I think it's best to just accept that that's how it is and not worry too much about it, not become too concerned. To have integrity of your own heart and to have respect for how other people practice and believe, I think is a pretty smart way to live in this world. I'm more than happy to have a conversation with anybody about why I'm a Christian in particular and not something else, to give a reasoned explanation for my faith. I'm more than happy to do that. I'm eager to do that. I love to do that. But at the same time, I'm going to listen with the same kind of respect that I hope to get to them talk about why they believe what they believe. You know what? It is about respect. When we bow, we make ourselves equal to one another. And we say, I'm not higher than you. We're equal on the floor. I'm Chris Thomas, and these are some reflections from the master class. Thanks for watching. Now, go train.